Okay, so I am attacking with my Thundering Great Axe, and keep in mind I've got Flaming Burst spell and Force Punch stored in it, and I'm wearing my Cyclops helm. And you're wearing the Cyclops helm. What do I roll? Okay, that gives you an insta crit. We still will need a d20 for confirmation, so you will roll all of them. All of them. Okay, well, all of the dice. Well, I brought my own dice tower, so I'm going to use that real quick. All right, here we go. Nice. Okay. Come on, big roll, big roll. You know, give it a minute. It's, you know, it's cool. It's epic, right? It's super epic. Yeah, very, very epic. Thanks, Joth. It's almost there. Almost there. Okay, yeah, just one second. Hello, welcome to Breath of Life Development. My name is Josh Foreman, and today we finish the Dice Tower. Hurrah! If you haven't seen part 1 of this, check it out right there. If you don't see it, you will be completely lost and have absolutely no idea what's going. I'm just kidding. It's literally the same thing. I shot them all at the same time, but there was just so much footage I had to break it into 2. So we got a bottom, and now we got the top, and we're gonna see the whole thing in action at the end. So stay tuned, and here's the process. Take it away, me. Thanks, me. So rather than build a tower in a bunch of individual segments, I started with one giant piece. Well, technically 2, I guess, and just sandwich them together. And I'm going to scry in the lines just because, hey, there's going to be all sorts of details covering these anyway. So, whoops. Let me just get that real quick. Okay, so yeah, and it turns out it's pretty easy to just run it along a metal ruler here to get these lines sort of in place. By the way, did you know that there is a dice tower dating back to the year 400 from Rome or Greece or someplace? Pretty cool, huh? Anyway, yeah, so I thought a good way to make the path going down here would be to paint this line going down the middle, and in black paint. It occurred to me afterward that I should have just done one line going down the middle instead of 2 lines along the side. It would have made a way cleaner, easier to follow line, but you live and you learn. This tool right here has a thicker, stiffer wire, and it allows you to make trenches really well. So I'm not 100% confident that these 2 shapes are perfectly met together, but, you know, a rock will roll through, so I figure dice should go through too. Okay, now I want to make these arches that are on the top of the pillar. When I put this in the full diorama, they're going to meet up with other arches, but for now I'm just going to do a half arch on each side. And a good way to draw an arch is to just get a string or a wire, attach it to the center point, and swing it around like this. Now I want to cut multiple boards at the same time, so I'm sticking these toothpicks in so that I can sandwich the boards together and they'll stay together when I cut them. But first I have to get this garbage out of the way. Stay tuned for the rest of the room-size diorama where this stuff will be used. Something that would really help me would be if you liked this video, if you share it. Subscribing always helps. Hey, even leaving a comment, that's the ultimate. I would love that. I realized I needed more of these arches. And then the little in-between part, I figure I could cut bricks out of that. So I made a whole bunch of little bricks with that excess material. Now I'm trying to figure out, as far as the shape is concerned, how do I want the profile to look? So I'm thinking it looks pretty cool for them to stick out like this, but then how are they going to be buttressed? It could just end straight like that, or I can do kind of a stair-steppy thing going down. Just playing with different shapes to see what I like best. One of the really nice things about this large wire cutter is that you could do things like this. Okay, now I'm adding texture to all these little rocks that I cut. Wearing a mask because I do not want to breathe that in. And I'm going to see the difference between those volcanic rocks and these marble rocks. Like, what's the texture difference look like? That's what the texture difference looks like. It's pretty subtle, but it's still worth doing, I think. Eventually, I'll probably get a collection of several different rock types that I could experiment with. I really like it when they chip like this because those make really authentic looking cracks. Okay, now to apply texture over this whole thing quickly, I thought, maybe I can just like run these rocks back and forth along it. And that worked all right. I'm still not sure at this point which of the surface area of this tower is actually going to be visible under the other detail I'm going to be adding. But another way to do this is with a big old hunk of aluminum foil. I'm using heavy duty foil. It leaves a bit of a better impression there. And then I have these texture tools that I made. Also just pressing rocks into it. There are all sorts of texture techniques. I have a whole video of it you should check out right here. I'm using plumber's epoxy here to make a tool specifically so that I could push the edges and corners in, just because it makes it look a little more natural if they don't line up perfectly. Follow my Instagram at breathoflifedev, please. You could carve it pretty easily for the first about 10 minutes, and then after that it sets up super hard. I also really enjoy hammering this stuff. Again, that gives really natural cracks. Although I don't usually like it when a crack travels across two rocks. That's not something you see in the reference very often, unless a wall has been besieged and hit with a mortar or something. And here's my little corner pusher. And yeah, it works pretty well. It's not quite as good as laying all the rocks individually, but for what it's worth, like, it's much faster to do it this way. So for this purpose, it works great. Now, I have these doors that I made for some other wall pieces of the diorama that I ended up losing and then rebuilding and then found them again. So I figure I could repurpose them here. I thought this would look more tower-like if I gave it some indication of inhabitation, so made these sort of barred windows to make it seem sort of like a prison tower or something. Kind of going with this idea that the dice are escaping from the prison. And I'm just shaving this one down with this little technique. I don't know what that technique is called, but it works well. Smoothing it out again with sandpaper. And now I'm experimenting with the best way to scribe the lines in for the individual stones. And lots more texture. Now I want to give the impression that these large vertical stones are like huge slabs and that are held together by these other horizontal slabs. So I'm using lightweight spackling to fill in the cracks there. And this is a channel the dice are going to roll down into the middle of the tower, so I'm smoothing that out as well. And I'm trying to make sure that the dice have a smooth path all the way down. I don't want them getting caught on little ledges, so I'm sanding and scraping to make sure that there's always a downward facing funnel for them. And I figure since you may be able to see through the bars to see the dice falling down, you're going to see the back wall. So I'm doing just a little bit of texture there. And here is the top bar of my wire cutter. I thought it was really cool to look at instead of the art I was doing, so I focused on that. Here's some little sauce container lids. I got a bunch of these in bulk for mixing paint, and I don't use the lids for anything, so I thought it'd be fun to use them here. They kind of make little decorative, I don't even know what that would be called, decorative archways. And I'm mixing up some more spackling, this time with some black paint and Mod Podge. There's no reason to really mix the paint into it, except that I feel like it's less likely I'm going to miss a spot and then have like a bright white chunk somewhere. Okay, now I'm working on what I will call balconies. Let's say these are balconies for where the little windows and doors are going to be. The shape language of the pillars is kind of like an hourglass that repeats over and over again, so it flares out and goes back in. I'm kind of exaggerating that for the sake of this particular dice tower, but yeah, this was just the direction I decided to go. Here are some decorative bits that I sculpted way back when I was working on the Colossus, and I was first thinking of doing the ruins. I didn't really know much about XPS foam sculpting at the time, so I did a lot of classic sculpture and then made molds to cast in resin, and I'm making some more of those for this project now. This stuff is called Freeform Air. It's really lightweight and makes a great mold material to use with XPS foam builds. You can see more about it in my video up here. Now, since these balcony bits are going to be a bit more of a focal point, I'm putting more detail. I'm laying in individual blocks and adding the decorative elements and such. And still kind of deciding how wide they should be. I decided this one needs to be 1 block less wide. And let's see, this particular decorative bit I had cast in resin a while ago, so cutting through resin requires a jewelry saw. Figuring out how the corners are going to work. And cutting out specialty corner blocks. These are the cornerstones of the project. Okay, doing a little gap filling. Okay, now I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do this corner because, yeah, angles are just, where 2 angles meet, it's really hard for me to figure out how to do that. This is something I think it's just going to take me some experience to get to the point where I'm comfortable doing it. It helps a lot to have the angle be the same on both sides. I made this mistake on the base where there were two different angles, and that just broke my brain. Yeah, a lot of improvisational builds like this is just a matter of adding and subtracting bits and pieces as you go. And I'm always, as I'm doing it, I'm realizing all the things that I could have done from the beginning that would have made everything way easier, but that's kind of the nature of improv. And here's more freeform air. Besides making molds or casts with it, it's also a great gap filler. I'm happy with the way that these ledges kind of flare out, but not super happy with the way they flare out much farther on the sides than on the front. So I'm trying to think of a way to bring that shape back into the core tower part. And again, just experimenting with different shapes, see what strikes my fancy. And like, do I want it to curve out like be concave or convex? And then I thought, oh, you know what? This could actually be part of sort of an overhang for this window here. That could be pretty cool. But I wasn't really happy with anything, so I decided to just throw the whole project away, just give up. But then I realized, wait a minute, this won't even fit in my trash can. And wait a minute, look at the shape of this trash can. Maybe I should trace that. Maybe that'll be cool. And so I traced my trash can on here and thought, you know what, that could actually work. And so I decided not to throw my project away, but it also led me to the better idea of making it just literally a circular arch. And I ended up liking that a lot better. So the moral of the story is, always decide to throw your project away about halfway through and then be inspired by the shape of your trash can. Okay, I used this 2-inch piece of foam to cut the main arch, and then I'm just slicing that into 4 pieces. Or maybe it was 6 pieces. It was enough pieces. Speaking of pieces, here is a bits box full of more textures that I had molded and cast for the Colossus. I really like the idea of using these on this tower because it mirrors the Colossus. Like in the game, the Colossi, the Colossuses, the Colossums, they all have architecture that is a reflection of the environment that they're from. It's as though the architecture came to life and became these things. So I really like the idea of reusing this stuff, and that actually ended up wasting me a lot of time, as you'll see, but I don't know. I did it anyway. Okay, now trying to figure out how these arches are going to work with the with the top one, because the top is a little bit different. The balcony flares out a little bit further to accommodate the big wing arches. And so I'm just trying to figure out what is the best way to keep everything like stylistically consistent, but still have some kind of difference at the top. And more texture fun. I still like to base coat as I go sometimes. I'm not sure if it's a good idea or not, but it makes me feel a little better. Now I'm trying to figure out how do I fill in these weird little gaps. Like there's this little triangle you see through, and that just doesn't seem very natural to me. Like I don't think anyone would build an object that has that to it. So I'm thinking of how do I fill that gap in a way that also conforms to the rest of the geometry of the building. And this seemed like a pretty good solution. This way I can have both the same arch that the other two windows have, but also take into account the new geometry that the wing arches bring into play. And yeah, I think the line going from this particular sort of slab into the top of the tower seems like a good idea. And here's me being really bad at geometry again. I put glue on the wrong side of the triangle. So we'll just let that set for a little bit while we fill this gap. And now the glue's dry, I can peel it off and glue the correct side. All part of the plan. Okay, this is the part that really took me way longer than it should have. Again, these are pieces from the Colossus. I cast a bunch of them. You know, I had some off casts basically that didn't work for the, I think it was the leg armor these were used on. But I thought, wow, this would make a really good sort of archway decoration. So I put this tape around a foam blank that I could build these around, filled it in with hot glue, this is canned air that makes the hot glue dry really quickly, cool off real quickly. And yeah, I just ran into nothing but trouble. I had to cut these into all these little tiny pieces and then glue them together, and they kept falling apart or warping in different ways. It just wasn't the best idea. I thought maybe if I rubber band them to my blank, I'd be able to keep them stuck together better, and even that wasn't quite working. Here I am using epoxy clay to kind of weld everything together on the front. And you know, if I would have just built this out of XPS foam, I think it would have been done like at least 10 times faster, because I could have just cut those little chunks like in one strip and then 2 different arches to sandwich on the front and back, and I would have been done. Since sculpting is my original sort of skill set and modeling is not, I always feel like I'm playing to my strengths when I can get in and start actually sculpting details on it, but it also takes a lot longer. It uses heavier material, more expensive material, so it's kind of a balance that I try to strike. I try to fall back onto sculpting only when I've kind of hit a dead end. And I think the more experience I have building with XPS foam, the less often I'll hit those dead ends. That's my hope, at least. I've got a Discord at Breath of Life Development. Please check it out. We've got an amazing community of really positive, talented people. It's a fun place. Okay, time for that classic terrain builder's supply, the googly eye. Now, if you saw the previous video about the base, you'll recognize these pieces. This was originally going to go around the kind of the crown of the base part, and then I decided to use a different material for that. So I had these left over, and I thought, well, I could reuse these for the top of the tower. This pattern is not exactly like the base of the tower, but it's similar enough that I think it works. The little metal pieces you see are studs that are used for leather work. You can get those in bulk on Amazon or at craft stores. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Foreman. Oh, and the round rubber bits, those are O-rings used in plumbing. I got a bunch of those at the hardware store. Okay, back to the spackling to kind of fill in some cracks. I wasn't totally feeling, you know, like it seems really apparent that these are rubber rings and not carved circles. So I'm trying to fill in the back area where it meets the stone there. And then while I've got this brush all covered with this goop, I'm adding texture to the metal bits so they won't be super pristine and smooth, because that would just make them look different than the rest of the stone. I don't mind some of them looking different and smooth because you want that variation, but they shouldn't all be different and smooth. This green foam, it's also XPS. It's almost identical. They were just out of it at the hardware store I was looking, and I could only get this little 2x2 sheet. And my little doors are not quite plug and play. Since I added the frames, I needed to dig out a little bit more. I think that's looking pretty good. There's a few gaps that you can kind of see around the edges, so I'm just filling that with some black foam core and black hot glue. And then it occurred to me that I could cut a hole in the top as well and have sort of a little storage compartment for the dice up there. There you can see all the way through, and double checking, it does slot into the base nicely. And this is literally the first time I was able to test the whole thing top to bottom and make sure that the dice actually roll all the way through and come out the bottom. And I was pretty happy about that. And sometimes the dice can even escape this gate, which I think is fantastic. That is the house rule that I've got. If your dice escapes the gate, you get to choose the number. All right, and here I thought, wow, here's an opportunity to add something a little cooler on the sides. Here's some more parts. You can see this was taken from the Colossus's like belt thing. And I figure there's windows with bars and there's sort of a deck or balcony. It would make sense that there would be doors somewhere too, right? So I decided to put doors on the side. And since I am not using wood anywhere, I'm not making these wood doors. I'm making them very fancy carved stone doors. You can follow my page at Breath of Life Dev on the Facebook. Tell Zuckerberg I sent you. Now to get this thing really tightly together, like I do not want this thing wobbly or loose at all, I'm clamping it and then stabbing barbecue skewers through and making sure they're anchored on both sides with hot glue, so there's no way these things are going to fall apart. If you'd like updates on the big picture stuff that I'm doing, check out breathoflifedev.com, and you can find my newsletter sign up there, and I'll send you emails. I mean, not many, I don't spam them. I think literally the last one I sent was a year ago, but I plan to be a little better with that. To make sure the dice slide down smoothly, I'm adding this little bit here so that there's no chance it can get caught on little nooks and crannies. This actually would have been a perfect place to use some craft foam. I don't know why I thought I should use this thin bit of XPS foam, but that's what I did. Okay, and a good test fit to make sure all of this will actually fit together, and thank goodness it did. And I'm carving out a little trench so that I can dig that second arch in and make it feel really integrated. And one more skewer to make it super secure. Don't forget that I stream this stuff on Twitch every Wednesday and Sunday. Okay, and the final assembly, this is where things get serious and tense because the glue's going on and this stuff's gonna stick. And then I felt like it was missing something. It needed these little elements at the top to really kind of give it a grand conclusion. So I made these sort of lines to follow the arc of the arch. And a little final cleanup. I always like to carve off these boogers. To me, nothing gives away the scale and makes something seem artificial more than these weird little like nuggets sticking off the sides of the wall. Doing a wash. If you want to see more of the painting process, make sure you check out the previous video about the base. I go into more detail about the painting process there. Adding some happy highlights, but not too many highlights. I always underplay my highlights because it's very easy to add them if you feel like they're missing later. But when they're over everything, I think that just, again, it's not realistic. Speaking of realism, I'm adding some heavy staining on here. This is something that I see in almost all reference of ruins and castles, is very dark stains. I always feel like I underplay it and then I keep adding more and more to try to match my reference, and it just gets to the point where it's almost completely black in areas. And especially given what I'm doing specifically here, I think it works. I always pay a lot of attention to the paint as it's dripping down to make sure that it's not dripping in a drop width line, because that gives away the scale. I want it to be either thicker than a drop width or thinner. And now adding some lichen splotches. I still don't have a technique that I'm super happy with as far as the lichen. Again, I'm looking at reference. I'm trying to match it as well as I can. And it's like, in detail, it works. But for whatever reason, when I step back and look at the whole thing, I just don't like it. Oh, and a detail I forgot to add on the base and the tower, so I'm just going to do it all now, is going in and adding some shiny stones here and there. Another thing you'll see in reference a lot. Another thing I noticed, in the last video I pointed out some areas where the spackling that I applied bubbled, and you know, even now, weeks later, I'm still finding more bubbles have been growing. So like I said last time, I'm not sure exactly the mixture I did. I'm going to need to do some tests to make sure that I don't accidentally do this again. Fortunately, this is, you know, ruins and the rocks are supposed to be rough and and broke it and stuff anyway, so it's fine to go in and lop these off. But yeah, I would like to know what's making that happen so I can avoid it in the future, or use it for, you know, something that I want to be lumpy. But ashlar stone, I do not want to be lumpy. And since I've got this kind of paint that I'm patching things up with, I figure I might as well add a few more details. And back to shining up the tower. Now, I ended up going back over almost all of the black staining that I did with the shine. It just seemed to make sense that in most places where the black stain is, it would also be a little bit shiny because you'd expect some moisture there, or you'd expect the stone to be very smooth from, you know, the water just going over it over and over again. So next time I'm going to try adding just shiny black instead of matte black for my stains. And also giving a little bit of shine variation to the tiles here. Okay, and like I mentioned, I was unhappy with this lichen, so I'm going in with alcohol, spraying it down, and just kind of jabbing and scrubbing at it with a pretty stiff brush to try to smear it a little bit. I think one of the problems is that the lichen actually looks pretty realistic as a 1-to-1 scale. It looks right, but from a distance, it would be more like smoothed out. You would see much more feathered edges, not these very clear edges. And now I'm adding various detritus, rocks and gravel and grass. And you could always spray the PVA glue with alcohol to thin it out and make it squeeze into all the little cracks really well. This is definitely one of those processes that you can get carried away with and just sink into for way too long, but it's also one of the parts that I enjoy the most, so I don't mind spending a long time on it. Okay, and finally, I had this problem where the dice just fell through way too fast. This tower is epic, it should take a while, there should be some buildup for the dice to fall down. So I had this thought that the back is unfinished. I purposely left it unfinished because this is mostly just designed for a photo shoot. And I thought, you know what, I could literally just tear the back open and add little impediments for the dice as they roll down. And that takes care of my biggest fear, which was that they would get stuck on these things, right? But if there's a way to access it from the back, I don't have to worry about that. So I experimented with different platforms and stuff, you know, like these are too wide, the dice could get stuck on them. I thought, well, I could kind of make them diamond shaped. And then I had the idea to just use skewers again. And so this is very much like pachinko. And I figure it would give a nice sort of pleasing little plinky sound as the dice go down, right?
Well, Jack, why don't you drop the first ball?
I'd love to.
Hold on. Let's go towards the middle.
And then I was having so much fun doing that, I figured I could open the back even more. And some of that light would shine through the bars in the front. I thought that could be cool. And then I was thinking, should I use this mesh or should I use skewers? Ultimately, I decided I should use whatever's fastest because this is not the side that's designed to be seen. Now I have these other barbecue skewer things that are kind of a different shape, and I thought these would be even better than the round ones. I think they make a better like plunk sound when the dice hit them. And so I was experimenting with the density that I need them at to make sure that the dice can go through. Did a whole bunch of tests. You can see like, oh, look at that. They can catch on the edge there. And once I thought it was a pretty good density, I hot glued them in place. And then still found more places where they could get stuck. So I ended up just yanking several of them out. Did a whole bunch of testing. And then look at, yeah, even more. So what I learned is that for the other places I'm going to open it up, I'm going to add far fewer of the sticks. Another time it caught right on the lip there, so I figured, you know what, I can carve this away, make it a smooth ramp, so that shouldn't happen anymore. And more futzing around, trying to decide how I want to actually block in the back there. Okay, and I pretty much just repeated that 2 more times to make sure that there's enough room and fun stuff for the dice to bounce around on. Don't forget you could email me with questions, suggestions, business opportunities right here. And then to make little doors that I could pop on and off easily, I just made a little frame out of the foam and put the mesh there. Figured I could just put little nails into the corners and then stick them on and off. If this was going to be something that I thought I would do a lot of, then I would go with something like magnets or Velcro. But since this is pretty much just for debugging purposes, I figured nail would be fine. And then after another test, look at this. Can you even believe this? How did this even happen? Physics. It's amazing. And more tests. And here I see some of the skewers actually popped through the front. I could have been more careful about that, but again, they're ruins, so it's no big deal to have these little chips and pits here and there. Just gotta paint over them and they'll be fine. And one final detail, the thing I hate about these grass clumps is that they're all the same length grass, so I just go in and clip little bits and pieces here and there. And gotta clean off all the scrap that fell on the base while I was carving that. Oh, and look at this, a bunch of Mod Podge and paint dripped down through the middle when I was painting the inside of the little pegs, so I needed to clean that up. And ta-da! It works! And there we go. As usual, a big shout out to my patrons. Especially, I want to shout out Neil at Real Terrain Hobbies, who bumped his pledge up when he heard that my rent is going up 3 times. And I want to clarify, you know, I did the math. It's not actually 3 times, it's 2.5 times. So it's double and then half again. It's nearly 3 times. It feels like 3 times. Whatever, we'll soldier through. I appreciate, thank you so much, Neil, especially when another creator that I really admire puts his money where his mouth is. That's really cool. You know, I patron a lot of other creators, and it's just very heartwarming when they patron back. Speaking of that, hey, this is the last video that's taking place in this studio. This has been my art studio for the last 12 years, and since I started YouTubing, really. And yeah, it's gonna be kind of sad to leave it behind, but you know, you roll with what life gives you. And if life gives you 2 mini dice, you make a dice tower, and then you roll in that dice tower. All right, let's see what I got. All right, I got 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. What does that mean? That means you get, oh, I didn't think this was possible, but the Flaming Burst spell, along with the Force Punch, with a critical failure, you actually end up embedding your axe in your own sternum. And let's see, we established last round that your blood alcohol ratio is 80%. So actually, yeah, sorry, your blood catches on fire, and you are consumed with magical fire from the inside out, and you're dead. Yeah. Okay, I mean, so yeah, I mean, thanks for coming and playing with us, Joth. Thanks for bringing your tower. It was indeed very epic. Well, you guys could still use the dice tower. I don't mind. Yeah, no, it's fine. You can take the tower, keep the tower. We'll just roll a dice the old-fashioned way. I think, yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, sometimes these things just happen. Sometimes, you know, it's not your fault, not anyone's fault. I mean, you didn't have to drink all 5 kegs that the merchant offered, but, okay, well, good luck with the rest of the campaign. I'll see you guys later.